The 70s were the last decade where Hollywood genuinely did not know what it was allowed to make, and a handful of directors used that confusion to push further than anyone had gone before. Every single one of them paid for it immediately, with studios pulling them from theaters, distributors refusing to touch them, and the people who made them spending years trying to recover from the fallout. When Lipstick was screened for test audiences in 1976, people were screaming at the screen during the acquittal, which told the studio everything it needed to know about how the film would land and nothing about how to sell it. A successful fashion model takes her sister's music teacher to court after he assaults her, watches the defense use her own modeling photographs to argue she invited it, sees him walk free, and picks up a rifle when he comes back for her sister. Anyone who has ever watched someone escape accountability for something they clearly did will recognize the specific rage the courtroom sequence produces, and the film knew exactly what it was doing by making those arguments as airtight as possible. Margot, pronounced Margot, Hemingway had already signed a record-breaking $1 million contract with Fabergé to be the face of their Babe perfume, and it was that modeling fame that led the studio to cast her with no acting experience. She received reviews calling her talentless and began a downward spiral. The press spent years describing as the Hemingway curse, while the studio that built its entire campaign around her image quietly moved on without her. What makes it genuinely hard to shake is that her real 14-year-old sister Marielle was cast as the second victim, received the only positive reviews from the entire production, and later wrote about watching her sister film those scenes in a memoir that is harder to read than anything in the movie itself. Midnight Cowboy is the only X-rated film in history to win the Academy Award for Best Picture. What most people do not know is that United Artists self-applied the X rating after a psychologist warned the film's content would be a bad influence on young audiences, meaning the studio essentially handed itself the most controversial label in Hollywood to protect the film from cuts and use the notoriety as a marketing tool. Joe Buck is a naive Texan who arrives in New York, convinced he can make a fortune as a hustler for wealthy women, discovers the city has no interest in him at all, and forms an unlikely bond with Ratso Rizzo, a sickly street con man, as the two of them try to survive a winter that is slowly killing one of them. The friendship at the center of the film is the kind that makes you think about people you have known who needed more than you gave them, and it lands harder than most thrillers, because nothing in it is designed to protect you from how it ends. The most famous line was completely unscripted. A real taxi nearly ran over Dustin Hoffman mid-take. He slammed his hand on the hood out of genuine anger and kept the Ratso voice out of pure adrenaline, and the director, naturally, kept the take. The Wicker Man was so despised by its own studio that British Lion cut it down and released it as the bottom half of a double bill, which is the cinematic equivalent of being told to wait outside. A devoutly Christian Scottish police officer travels to a remote island to investigate a missing girl, finds the community has abandoned Christianity for a pagan religion that treats him with cheerful contempt, and slowly realizes the investigation itself was the trap. The ending hits audiences like a door slamming shut, and the feeling it leaves is not the adrenaline of a standard thriller, but something closer to helplessness. That specific dread of realizing the rules you trusted were never the rules everyone else was playing by. And what makes it genuinely remarkable is that the film builds all of that dread in broad daylight, with folk music playing, which almost no horror film before or since has managed to pull off. Christopher Lee, weirdly enough, played Lord Summerisle for zero salary because he was that desperate to escape his Dracula typecasting. He personally called critics and offered to cover their travel costs to screenings, and still watched the studio do everything in its power to make sure nobody saw it. The original master negatives were allegedly destroyed during construction of a British motorway, a story that has never been verified but has circulated so long and so convincingly that most people who love the film have simply decided to believe it anyway. Nobody on the set of 100 Rifles was getting along, and that was before anyone had even filmed the scene the studio was most nervous about. An American lawman travels to 1912 Mexico to arrest a half-Indian bank robber. The two men get caught in a war between the government and a tribe being massacred, and they are joined by a revolutionary played by Raquel Welch, who the film, surprisingly, treats as their equal in every firefight. What the film did on screen was genuinely groundbreaking. For 1969, as one of the first major studio films to feature an interracial sex scene, and what was happening off it was complete chaos, with three people who were all there giving three completely different explanations for why. Jim Brown said the real issue was Raquel's iron grip over her own image, controlling camera angles and publicity shots, until he withdrew from all contact just to protect the production. Burt Reynolds said it started when Raquel refused to stop the Land Rover for a black stuntman walking in blistering heat, at which point Brown physically lifted her out of her seat and deposited her on the side of the road. Raquel's husband said Brown arrived furious after photographers at the Madrid airport ignored him completely and spent the rest of the shoot delivering hours of political speeches nobody asked for. He also allegedly discovered Raquel in a caravan with a Spanish co-star, went to a drawer, pulled out a pistol, and chased the actor between caravans while bullets flew. Raquel later described her own role as Baloney in a cheesecake factory. You be the judge. The production of Myra Breckinridge was so completely out of control that the stories from it are more entertaining than anything in the actual film, which is saying something for a movie where Mae West returned from a 27-year retirement and immediately decided she was the star. Raquel Welch had spent years trapped by her poster girl image and genuinely believed this was the first real role she had ever been offered, the kind that would finally prove she could act, and she spent the first 3 weeks of production sobbing in her trailer. After a man undergoes gender reassignment surgery and returns to America as Myra, she takes over her uncle's Hollywood acting academy and begins dismantling every student who represents conventional masculinity, while the film around her collapses into something nobody involved could agree on or control. What you actually got was 2 women who refused to share a frame, a director who spent an entire day filming a table of food, and Shirley Temple threatening to sue because a clip of her milking a goat ended up in an X-rated context, a situation the studio resolved by quietly cutting the footage and hoping nobody asked questions. The role Raquel believed would finally legitimize her became the thing she was most mocked for, and she later admitted it never achieved what she had hoped, which she recorded in a DVD commentary decades later by simply saying she could not believe she had been in it. There's a reason Pretty Baby is essentially unavailable on any major streaming platform today, and it has nothing to do with the film's quality and everything to do with what it asked an 11-year-old girl to do on camera in 1977. Set in a 1917 New Orleans brothel, the film follows Violet, a 12-year-old girl who has grown up inside the house, and watches her virginity auctioned off as a ritual of passage before forming a consuming bond with a photographer who documents the women around her. The film was banned in Canada and parts of Australia, and what makes it genuinely difficult to sit with is not the subject matter alone, but the matter-of-fact tone, the way it presents exploitation as mundane, which is either a profound artistic choice or an irresponsible one depending on who you ask, and nobody has stopped asking. Brooke Shields revealed in a 2023 documentary that the production felt like a surreal bubble, where she did not fully grasp the controversy she was generating, which is perhaps the most disturbing detail of all, that the subject of the controversy was the only person on set who did not understand what was happening. The Deer Hunter won Best Picture while being publicly denounced by veterans groups and labeled a bloody lie by a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist because the Russian roulette sequences at the center of the film had no documented historical basis. And the director claimed he had seen news clippings verifying the practice, a claim historians have spent decades looking into and found no evidence to support. 3 friends from a Pennsylvania steel township out to Vietnam expecting something they can survive are captured and forced to play Russian roulette for their captors' amusement, and come back so changed that the town they left behind no longer knows how to hold them. The wedding sequence at the start is so long and so specific and so warm that the audience genuinely does not see what is coming, and losing those characters to what follows hits harder because you spent a full hour believing their world was safe. One of the leads was dying of cancer during production. De Niro threatened to walk if he was replaced, and Meryl Streep's Oscar-nominated performance was filmed while she was watching her partner disappear in real time. Bring Me the Head of Alfredo Garcia is Sam Peckinpah making a film about a man so broken by grief that he carries a severed fly-infested head across Mexico in a burlap sack and starts talking to it, and the reason it feels genuinely unhinged is that the director was not entirely separate from his lead. Benny, a down-and-out piano player in a grimy Mexican bar, hears there is roughly $10,000 on offer for the head of a dead man, digs up the grave himself, and watches everything he loves get destroyed before he can collect. If you sat down with this expecting a fun action romp because you liked The Wild Bunch, the experience of watching a sweaty, grief-destroyed man argue with a rotting head in a bag was not what you had in mind, and the audience in 1974 predictably made that very clear by staying home. The director gave Warren Oates his own prescription sunglasses to wear for the entire film, which meant Oates spent the production nearly blind in 100-degree heat, stumbling through scenes in genuine disorientation, and the performance that resulted is so raw, it has taken decades for the world to catch up to what they were actually watching. Nobody who booked Mumsy, Nanny, Sonny, and Girly into their theater thought they were screening a film about adults who dress like toddlers and murder strangers in nursery rhyme rituals, and the parents who brought their children to what they assumed was a Saturday matinee found out the hard way. In a decaying English estate, two adult children who act like toddlers spend their days luring strangers from local parks, keeping the compliant ones as pets, and executing the rest in rituals governed by nursery rhyme logic, until a new captive figures out the family's jealousies and begins playing them against each other to survive. Several American theater chains pulled the film after just 2 days because the complaints were coming in faster than the studio could manage, and the marketing campaign had somehow given nobody any warning of what they were walking into. Vanessa Howard, who played Girly and was being positioned as the next major star in British cinema, found the experience so damaging that by the mid-70s, she had abandoned the industry entirely to become a grief counselor, refusing to ever discuss the film again, which tells you more about what filming it was like than any interview could. A lot of families bought tickets to Caligula in 1979 because it had Helen Mirren, Malcolm McDowell, and Peter O'Toole on the poster and looked like a serious Roman epic, yet within the first 5 minutes the entire theater knew exactly what kind of night this was going to be. After the death of Emperor Tiberius, the young Caligula ascends to the throne of Rome and descends into a madness so complete that he declares himself a god. But the version those families rented had been secretly altered by the producer, who returned to the set after filming wrapped with a crew of penthouse models, and inserted hours of unsimulated content without apparently telling anyone in the cast. McDowell saw the finished film, said he felt betrayed, that what he had made had been turned into expensive smut, and Gore Vidal sued to have his name removed. Helen Mirren somehow called it an irresistible mix of art and genitals, walked away with her career completely intact, and remains the only person involved who seems to have genuinely found the whole thing funny. And Caligula is really the perfect ending point for this list, because it captures everything that defined this era in one sitting: the ambition, the chaos, the betrayal, and the complete inability of anyone involved to agree on what they were even making.